hello, and welcome back to Grace and Grit. Today we've got many special artists with us today who have been all collaborating on a dance field project called Rage. We have two artists, Brietta Greger and Jess Coble, who have composed a piece based off of Professor Seeburger's book, The Irrelevance of Power. And yeah, so hello, thank you so much for coming. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, so I'll just get started with one question for both of you. Could you both just each tell me a little bit about yourselves, how you got involved with this project? We can start with Jess, and then we can go to Brietta.
Yeah, so Cellista asked me to compose a piece to be a part of the project after our European tour got put on hiatus because of COVID. Yeah, I was planning a tour with Cellista and Operification Hillary, who is also involved in this. She has a piece that is accompanying another one of the interludes for the project. But yeah, we were planning a European tour that unfortunately got put on hold. But we have worked together on West Coast tours in the past, and yeah, I was helping pull together the showcase that Freya was doing down here in Los Angeles as well. That also unfortunately got canceled due to COVID.
Yeah, that's neat. That's cool. And what about you, Brietta?
Basically the same story. I was going down to LA, and about a week before that concert date, everything went into shutdown, and that got postponed indefinitely. Pretty much the same.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Well, you know, I guess in this case, for this project, I guess it may have been a blessing because Cellista was able to get all of you artists together to work on this. So that's one good part about it.
Sure, yeah. It's something that we were all able to do remotely because it was like, she asked, can you compose a piece of this many minutes in response to this chapter, record from home? So I think there's a lot of us involved, even though we weren't able to get together, we were still able to make it work.
Right, yeah, and it's a neat project that way too, because it is really all kind of individual work, but then she kind of collaborates everything together and pieces everything to have this one big project. So that's cool. Well, Brietta, I'll just get started on a few questions for you specifically. So you were given a chapter from Professor Seeburger's book to then compose a piece, is that correct?
Yeah.
So could you just tell us a little bit about the chapter and how you interpreted it with your music?
Yeah, so I was given the chapter, What is a Riot? Which is kind of talking about the semantics of what constitutes a riot versus an uprising or a rebellion or protest. And it's basically, what is a riot? It's determined by the person who names it. So like talks about the Occupy Wall Street movement and the Black Power movement, and the people in those movements wouldn't call them riots are destructive. The people who were trying to squash those movements would classify it as a riot. And it's just kind of talking about the motive behind an uprising and the motive behind describing it as a riot, as something destructive. So I sort of like just meditated with that for a day or two, and like tried to convey like just that sort of building tension of when there is like a big social movement. It actually, I did this recording like maybe just a couple weeks before the protest started after George Floyd's murder. And it feels very poignant in that, you know, there's a social movement begging for civil rights, and you know, the media or politicians are saying, well, it's a riot, it's destructive. But I kind of just tried to convey the feeling of that building and building and building tension and like desperation and building rage, basically, like right before the eruption. And then I just sat on my floor with a concert bass drum and made sounds.
Wow, well, that's very interesting too, especially how that chapter turned out to be so relevant, really current and kind of in your own world. You know, everybody is kind of going on with this similar thing. That's fascinating. Wow, I'm excited to hear your piece now. That'll be really cool. And so you are a freelance percussionist. So you worked on many different projects, including, I believe, the Contemporary Commissions project in 2018. How does a project such as this one, apart from the obvious, you know, the COVID restriction about having to be individual, how did this one compare with other ones?
I think specifically comparing Rage to the Contemporary Commissions project, the main difference for me is that I'm not in charge of everything anymore. Contemporary Commissions project was my project, and it was my first like foray into the producing side. So it was a big learning experience, and it was a lot of work in ways I wasn't expecting. Whereas this, I feel so much more relaxed in that it was just, oh, can you read this chapter, write a response piece? And then like Cellista's so good at, you know, producing these multimedia projects. She's done this for a while.
Yeah, that's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because I find that, you know, all the other musicians that I've been interviewing for this project, they've all had a similar take to this, whereas they've participated in projects where they kind of are in charge of all different aspects. You know, they're producing everything, and now they're given the opportunity to really focus in on this one piece, this one instrument. And they found it really, you know, relaxing in a sense, but then also being able to focus so much more on just one, you know, finite thing. So yeah, that's neat perspective. Well, thank you, Brietta. I'm going to move on to some questions for Jess Coble. So Jess, kind of a similar question to Brietta's first one. You were given a chapter from Professor Seeburger's book. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that chapter and what you thought about it.
Yeah, I was given the interlude section, Political Junkies. That is kind of the idea of equating the modern political system with addiction, and the thought of it's not until total collapse that something new can come about, kind of with the thought process of like an alcoholic can't go to alcohol to find the solution to alcoholism, and while you're within the structure of the system, you're not necessarily going to be able to see a new path outside of that system until it has completely crumbled apart. But also at the same time needing to go through the harder times of that process as a learning tool to know what we don't want as a part of our system.
Wow. You know, when I hear both of you talking about all these different chapters, it makes me so excited to read the book. I have it coming in the mail. I think it should be coming next week or so. You have it? Oh, you both do. Well, I'm so excited to read all those chapters. I think it's so interesting too how all of them seem to focus on such different topics, but really tying it in all together. And so for your piece specifically, what instruments do you use for
So it was a collection of instruments, and it was a little bit of a back and forth. I composed a piece using my live production setup, which is an OP1, a little digital keyboard, a Moog Rogue analog keyboard, multi-effects processor, manipulating vocals, RC505 Boss loop station, a Flower Electronics Little Boy Blue dual oscillator, along with a couple other oscillators, and I incorporated a micro cassette of some found audio footage that is some older gentleman mansplaining political views to his wife that just seemed oddly like juxtapositionally appropriate to the position or the piece or the prelude or interlude that I was addressing, kind of because it's not until like the misogynistic, like male-centric point of view crumbles from a position of like self-righteous indignation and holding of power that an actual conversation will be able to arise. And yeah, and then once that original piece, I sent that over to Freya, and she asked me to incorporate some of my own vocalization a little bit more, and so then I went back and added a little bit more manipulated vocals, and ended up with the piece that I submitted for that ended up being a part of the compilation.
Wow. Well, that sounds so interesting. So many different things coming together. I can't wait to hear that one. And so have you ever worked on a project that kind of connects, you know, the humanities, literature, or philosophy, or would this be your first time?
Work in experimental folk music in a way, like just noise in general, and it's hard to like pull the study of humanity and philosophy out of that. It kind of becomes a part of the process. I've been actually doing an artistic series of putting out an original composition every day. I'm just wrapping up the 9th year of that process, like all rooted in the philosophy of you are what you do, so do what you love. And in that way, like furthering your artistic process a little bit every day, and in that way culminating yourself as an artist a little bit more each and every day. But I did a lot of live scoring to experimental films, a lot of stuff that I don't know, like wasn't necessarily in English, so it might have subtitles so people could follow along, but really having it be a recreation of it. A lot of stuff like some like Takashi Miike or Chanwol Park, like Visitor Q was something that we would go to a lot. And then I did some series or a series of shows with the sculptor that we would get a different theme and roll through, and one of those was Happy Hour with Bukowski. And so I just did a lot of like sound samples and projections of him doing readings while doing live electronics for these like 5-hour long sets, while people were able to come along and get a chunk of clay and put it into this massive like group clay piece that would come together. And then another one of those was making a gigantic clay collection of poop, so everybody would show up and make their little poop pile, poop coil, and then add it to the big poop pile, and eventually it was this massive like poop sculpture. But like, yeah, it like philosophy and humanity, if you're living in life looking at it through an artistic lens, is kind of incorporated in the creation process at all times, unless you're an island creating outside of society.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Well, I think that this is all that we have for today. Thank you so much for both of you for coming. Again, this is Jess Coble and Brietta Greger, and they're both collaborating on a project with Cellista, Rage, which I believe will be premiering October 15th. So I can't wait to see it. Thank you so much for joining in on this. I look forward to seeing you all.
Okay. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
What are you doing? You trying to be rapper now? No. Well, yeah, I know you got a